what's going on, guys? So, this is actually my third time recording this video. I recorded a review the first time I watched the Supergirl movie on opening night, but I just wasn't really satisfied with how it came out. So, I recorded a second review, but I held off on editing that one when a buddy of mine said that he wanted to see it, and I figured that I might have some new insights watching the movie a second time. And not really. I still feel pretty much the same way after watching it twice. And, I mean, look, man, it's not great. But it's also not terrible either. And I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's the combination of me, from the first trailer, not really vibing with the Guardians of the Galaxy-ness of it. Meanwhile, you had Craig Gillespie in interviews proudly proclaiming to have not read Tom King and Bilquis Evely's Woman of Tomorrow, despite being hired to direct a movie that is a direct adaptation of Woman of Tomorrow. And then there were just all the hyper-negative reviews, where everyone's like, this is the worst movie ever, and James Gunn is dead, the DCU is dead, my marriage is dead, it's over! So, by the time I actually sat down and watched the movie for myself the first time around, I'd already gone into it expecting the most heinous, botched cinematic abortion that existed despite the arts. Meanwhile, the movie we got is just a Phase 4 MCU movie, but with DC characters in it. So, again, not great, but, I mean, I've definitely seen worse, from both DC and Marvel. So, I'm not really sure where a lot of the strong ire for this movie is coming from, and if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, a lot of it feels very performative for the sake of engagement to me. Now, I will say, when watching the movie, there were two major negatives that hung out over this film for me. The first being that this movie is extremely frustrating, because it feels like it was one script draft or just one edit away from being something really special. Granted, we don't have access to the script yet. It's not available to the public or online, and I don't know what the working draft on set looked like, but just watching the movie, there were a few places where if there was just an extra line of dialogue here or there, or if a scene or two or three played out ever so slightly differently. Again, this could have been something really special, but it's just little things here and there. Like, there's a scene where Supergirl is on this dying planet, and there's this big action sequence, and she's looking for the main villain, Krim, who I'll talk about in a little bit, and he's like, maybe a block away. But Supergirl, with X-ray vision, and super hearing, and super smell, and super senses, can't find him? How hard would it have been to just have a throwaway line where Supergirl's like, oh shit, everything on this planet's lined with lead, I can't see anything. You know, there's even an easy out where just prior to that action sequence, Kara was drugged. So even a simple acknowledgement of her still being incapacitated or not at 100%, anything would have worked. But instead, it just makes her look incompetent. And there's another scene that directly follows this, where there's a pretty heated argument between Kara and Ruthie, who's the tag-along character like in Woman of Tomorrow, who, by the way, and this is of no fault of the actress, Eve Ridley did exactly what she was directed to do. This is not her fault, but Ruthie was awful and painfully annoying in this movie. I could not stand her ass, but I digress. But there's a scene where they're arguing over the freshly mutilated corpses of a family that Kara tried and failed to save. So maybe just have a moment where Kara's like, not now. I get that you're angry, and, you know, that's respected and whatever, but I'm a superhero, and I just failed to save this family from the main bad guy, so not now. Because with the scene as is, it kind of just comes off as poor taste. And again, they're just all these other little things. Like, why on an alien planet 200-something solar systems away are a bunch of aliens singing Girl from Ipanema? I mean, sure, it's cute, but like, it just feels very sloppy. And it's the kind of sloppiness that leads to Kara getting to the planet with the green sun at the end of the movie. But in the comic, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, in the comic, the planet was artificially designed to trap Superman under a kryptonite sun. But the movie never stops to offer the same explanation, or really any explanation. It's just a green sun that apparently hurts Kryptonians, I guess, even though nobody in the galaxy is aware of any Kryptonian survivors, and Superman isn't a cosmic celebrity because he's still early in his career, so there's no way that anybody would know about kryptonite, but whatever, dog. And again, the movie is just very sloppy in a way that the source material it's adapting isn't. And I think there's a lot here that would have been vastly improved or played a little better if there were a few reshoots here or there, or some ADR lines to recontextualize certain scenes to make them work better. As for my second big negative, like I said, director Greg Gillespie was somewhat proud of the fact that he'd not read Woman of Tomorrow, and it really shows. It really shows. Because where Bilquis Evely's depiction of the cosmic DC landscape is very epic fantasy in nature, more so resembling stuff like Treasure Planet, John Carter, or if you're into indie comics, Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan's Saga, the comic feels very unique and inspired in a way where the movie just kind of feels like Guardians of the Galaxy featuring Supergirl. Even down to Kara listening to old school music with her, I guess now, vintage iPod and her old school headphones, just like the ones that Star-Lord uses, and all the fucking needle drops throughout the movie. It just felt like Craig Gillespie was doing a really bad James Gunn impersonation with this film. There's an especially bad needle drop at the climax of the movie. Granted, it's not the worst needle drop ever, like everyone on the internet keeps trying to say it is. I feel like everyone's collectively forgetting David Ayer's Suicide Squad exists, because that movie is full of them. But it's a cover of The Middle by Jimmy Eats the World. I don't know who does the cover, though, but it's weird, because thematically, I think the song works really well with what the movie's trying to be and trying to say with Supergirl, but it doesn't work in that scene. Now, maybe if instead of opening with sleigh bells, they opened with the original version of The Middle and then bookended the movie with the cover version for the credits, I think that could have worked. But again, the way it plays, it just comes off as Guardians Light in a movie that already is giving off that vibe. Really, in a cinematic universe that's already given off that vibe. And to that point, even something that James Gunn avoided himself when making the Guardians movies was making the humanoid characters just look and feel like regular humans. He made sure that Star-Lord definitely stood out in that regard, and Craig Gillespie just didn't do that. I wish Ruthie and her family looked like alien elves like they do in the comics. I wish the Brigands had more distinct features than just dudes in biker outfits with office supplies stapled to their faces. I wish the inhabitants of that planet Bilquis had more distinct alien features as well. And the brides, you know, they all just kind of came off as looking like regular ass humans in space, you know, and for a movie that James Gunn bolstered as, we're going to show you the DC universe. This isn't just going to be the DC Earth universe. This is going to be the DC universe with everybody in it. It just kind of felt like Earth, but in space. I don't know. It just kind of sucked. I also didn't like Craig Gillespie's choice of framing Supergirl as a reluctant hero, because in the comic that he didn't read, Supergirl initially turns down Ruthie's offer to kill Krim because she's a superhero, not a bounty hunter. But the movie frames it as, well, Krim shot my dog, so fuck you and fuck your revenge. I'm only going to do this to save my dog. And it just makes Kara feel like an asshole in a way that's directly counter to the way that Woman of Tomorrow portrays her. Where in the comic, she's considerate and caring and kind, even though she's not always nice. And I feel like Craig Gillespie and screenwriter Anna Nogueira both misinterpreted that as okay, so like, asshole, crash out disaster gal? Yes! And as an adaptation of Woman of Tomorrow, it really misses the mark. Which, by the way, I'm not trying to come off as one of those, if you don't make it exactly like the comic, then don't make it at all. Like, I'm not a purist. Please trust and believe. There are definitely plenty of comic book adaptations that 100% miss the mark on the source material that it's adapting, but still comes out pretty good in their own right. Case in point, Zack Snyder's Watchmen. That's a movie that completely misses the point of the original comic book in how it's stylized and how the ending is changed from the psychic squid to a series of nukes around the world. Be that as it may, the movie itself is still really solid and really fun and stands out on its own despite failing as an adaptation. But unfortunately, it's hard to say the same for Supergirl. Even just visually, Matheus Lopez has a very dynamic, vibrant coloring style that complements Bilquis Evely's dramatic, sketchy backgrounds quite wonderfully. And I know for a fact that you can simulate this in live action, because I've seen Hail Mary, I've seen The Last Jedi, I've seen Speed Racer, and I've seen Guardians of the fucking Galaxy Volumes 2 and 3 directed by James Gunn. So the fact that this Supergirl movie is just a muddy brown mess most of the time is a real fucking shame. Now, as for things that I liked in the movie, because there genuinely is a lot to like, I think, I really like Millie Alcock as Supergirl. You know, I think she does a really good job with the material she's given, and hopefully when we see her again, she's got better material to work with. I like the soundtrack. The score is a bit forgettable, unfortunately, but the soundtrack is dope, and Girl from Ipanema withstanding, because that shit was dumb as fuck. But I like the action. You know, I think the action for the most part is really good. There are a few punches here and there that are kind of rubbery, and sometimes when Lobo's whipping his chain, it's not a euphemism by the way, he actually does that, it feels a bit feathery, like he's whirling a baton with some string rather than a 900-pound chain. But for the most part, you can feel the impact of every punch and every kick or body slam. And I also really appreciated how the action doesn't feel choreographed. Supergirl's not a trained fighter. She's just throwing punches and power kicks and crashing into people. And I really liked how authentic her action scenes felt. I like Jason Momoa as Lobo. He's just one of those fan castings that's so obvious and it still manages to work in execution. There's no reason for him to be here, but I like the scenes that he was in. I also really like the Supergirl costume. I think it looks really nice. I will say I have the same problem with Supergirl's costume that I have with Superman's, in that the Jim Lee lines have got to go. It just feels like visual noise and clutters up an otherwise really beautiful costume. I also, for the sake of adaptation, don't mind Krim's backstory being streamlined. So instead of being like an evil John Carter, Robin Hood type who joins up with the Brigands to help out with their greater galaxy project, in the movie, Krim is part of the Brigands from the jump, and here, the Brigand homeworld was destroyed, so Krim and a few remaining survivors are trafficking women across the galaxy to keep the species from going extinct. Again, I wish they kept the swashbuckling pirate motif for Krim and the Brigands, because the space biker gimmick just makes them kind of feel like background characters in a James Gunn Guardians movie. But other than that, I like the idea behind the reimagining. And I think on paper, there's a really cool parallel that can be drawn between Krim and Kara with how they've both come to terms with being cosmic refugees. It's just really unfortunate that the movie never actually draws that connection between the two of them. But yeah, Supergirl is not great, but it's not terrible. You know, it's just very sloppy, which is really frustrating because there's a great movie in here somewhere about enduring tragedy and accepting who you are in the face of trauma, and how we don't have to be the sum of what we've suffered. But the movie itself never does anything with those ideas, So they all kind of just fall flat on the ground. Even if you disregard Craig Gillespie completely missing the point of the source material because, I don't know, I guess Hollywood Man thought that he was too good to read a superhero comic book, even though he's working on a superhero movie based on a superhero comic book. Like, even if you disregard that, I feel like the movie itself is just 2 degrees west of something really special on its own, and it just comes down to weird, counterintuitive choices being made in the scripting process, and the editing process, and the directing process. I will also note, just because it's on my mind, weird choice to make a Supergirl movie based on Woman of Tomorrow as the pseudo-sequel to a Superman movie, where it's very established that Superman is still early in his career. Because a major aspect of the comic book, Woman of Tomorrow, is that Kara is struggling with living in the shadow of her cousin's decade-spanning legacy, but that doesn't really play well in a context where Superman's only been around for like 3 years. So I just thought that it was very weird. Oh, and one more thing. Supergirl killing Krim at the end of the movie. Personally, I don't know how to feel about it, because I feel like, much like with Superman, you can definitely make a creative case for Supergirl taking a life, but I just don't feel like this movie did. Contextually, thematically, or narratively. I don't think it works. She spends the whole movie telling Ruthie that killing is wrong, only to stab a man in the throat while he's already down and beaten. The internet dragged Zack Snyder balls first through a field of hypodermic needles and broken glass over Superman killing General Zod in the heat of the moment to solve the trolley problem. But nobody has a problem with Supergirl stabbing a guy in the throat after he'd already been beaten? When, again, in the comic, Supergirl gets to a point where she herself is about to chop Krim's block off, but Ruthie stops her because Supergirl's strength isn't in her malice, it's in her grace. And that's why Kara spares Krim, despite everything he'd done. And again, I can be sold on the idea of Supergirl taking a life, just like with Superman, or Batman, or Iron Man, or any other superhero, especially within the context of a movie. And in this particular case, I think I see what the movie's trying to go for, where little girls are forced to grow up before they're ready because they're often damaged by older men. I think so. Supergirl kills Krim so that Ruthie doesn't have to, protecting Ruthie's innocence. Again, I think the problem is, A, the movie does a really bad job of communicating that idea, if, in fact, that's what it's trying to say. And B, this specific movie is adapting this specific comic book, where Kara teaches Ruthie the true weight and value of grace, mercy, and kindness in these really beautiful, quiet moments throughout the comic that aren't in the movie, by the way, where Kara teaches Ruthie how to wash her hands after using the bathroom, and helps a man bury his family after Krim slaughters his village, and is a shoulder to cry on for that alien warrior who lost her family to a brigand's raid. Ruthie reminds Supergirl that her greatest superpower is in her compassion. So, for a movie adapting this specific comic book to end with Kara killing an unarmed man, I think is unforgivable. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Supergirl. Again, despite the overwhelming negativity of the video, I didn't hate it. It's just not the movie that it could have been. Because it could have been, even more so than Superman, the movie that shows normies everything that the DC Universe can be in live action. But instead, it's just a Marvel movie. And I do think it's a little funny how, for over a decade now, the internet's been clamoring for DC to be more like the MCU, and here we are. So that's my video. That's my take. Those are my thoughts. But what about you? What did you think of Supergirl? Let me know down below in the comment section, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.